to this discussion about Brexit and Ireland. I'd just like to tell you how we'll be doing things. We will have, I'll introduce the speakers in a minute, and then we'll have a few questions to get the ball rolling, and then afterwards we'll open it up to the floor if anybody wants to ask a question. If you want to ask a question, of course, in English or French, but I think from what I gather, the presentations or the discussion, the initial conversation, shall we say, will be taking place in English. I think that's the what has been agreed. I'd like to thank Sinead for organising this. Of course, it's a topic that is very much in the air. It's also perfect timing because the discussion is taking place a week after the British elections, which changed everything utterly. We have May weakened. We have the probability now of a softer Brexit, and we even have the possibility, as I'm speaking, of the DUP being involved in some kind of joint venture, shall we say, with the Conservatives in London. Meanwhile, not back at the ranch, but elsewhere, we have in France, President Macron has just been elected, and in Ireland, we have a new Taoiseach since yesterday, Leo Varadkar, who has announced his new cabinet, and there's going to be a new Minister of Foreign Affairs and Brexit, in other words, a specific label there. So it's going to be interesting to see how that affects things as well. Throughout this whole debate, up until now, the dominant lexicon, I think, outside the Leave camp in the UK has been uncertainty, disruption, instability. Europe, on the other hand, is associated with words like fluidity, exchange, movement. Brexit was a hardening of borders. It's associated with contraction, almost with a form of sclerosis. If Brexit has produced what amounts to an existential crisis across Europe, it has produced a disproportionately strong effect in Ireland. Dahi O'Kelly, who is the former Irish ambassador to London and who edited a report at the beginning of this year of the Institute of International and European Affairs, described Brexit as an asymmetric shock affecting Ireland more than any other EU state. In the Brexit psychodrama, Ireland is indeed unique for a certain number of reasons. The fact that Ireland will be the only member of the European Union to have a land border with the UK, that since the end of the Troubles, people have become used to moving across that border without let or hindrance, as the expression goes. The fact that since 1922, there's a common travel area between Great Britain and Ireland, offering people of British and Irish nationalities almost better rights than they get under current European law. The fact that Europe has participated actively in promoting peace in Ireland through its major investment in the form of Peace 1 to Peace 4, the fact that the people in Northern Ireland have the right to dual nationality. All of these things make for a very special issue. Charlie Flanagan, who was the Minister of Foreign Affairs up until the reshuffle, writing in The Guardian, said that if Brexit can be seen as Britain's biggest foreign policy challenge since joining the EEC in 1973, the same could be said for Ireland. And he goes on to say the following, which will give you an idea of what we're talking about. Ireland's relationship with Britain is unique in every possible way, he says, politically, economically, culturally, legally, and in terms of people-to-people links. 1 in 4 people in Britain can claim Irish heritage, while in the business world, almost 60,000 UK company directors are Irish-born. The Dublin-London route is the second busiest air route in Europe. We trade over 1.2 billion euros a week between us, and Ireland is the UK's 5th largest trading partner. We must do everything we can to protect these hard-won positive links, is what he says. So that's to give you an idea of the frame, if you like, of what we'll be talking about tonight. A frame that, of course, goes well beyond the Irish Ireland frame, to use that expression. And we want to talk, therefore, to 3 people this evening, coming from very different perspectives. The first person is Gaëtan Ricard-Newell, here to my left. Gaëtan was in charge of the team for European and International Affairs in the cabinet of the Belgian Deputy Prime Minister, Isabelle Durand. She acted, amongst other things, as coordinator during the Belgian presidency of the EU Council. In April 2004, she became chief advisor to the president of Notre Europe, Institut Jacques Delors, and she's now director of that. She went on to join the European Commission Directorate General for Education and Culture, specializing in the audiovisual policy. And she's been with the European Commission representation in Paris since 2011. And in 2011, she also published a book entitled Pour une fédération européenne d'États-nations, la vision de Jacques Delors, revisitée, publiée donc chez Larcier. Dan O'Brien is chief economist at the Institute of International and European Affairs, one of Ireland's leading think tanks. He's also adjunct senior research fellow at the School of Politics and International Relations at UCD. He's a weekly columnist for the Irish Independent Group. He was economics editor as well for the Irish Times at one stage, working on European and Irish issues. He's worked for the European Commission and as a consultant for the United Nations. And he had a book which was published in 2009, Ireland, Europe and the World, Writings on a New Century. And last, but by no means least, we have Alain Salle. And Alain, I was telling him when we met up in Sinead's room earlier on that I was really impressed by his invisibility on the net. Of course, his articles are everywhere, but if you try to find anything about him, you will have great difficulty. You won't get a picture, you won't get anything. But Alain, therefore, is journaliste avec Le Monde. Il est en charge de l'Europe, and he is ancien correspondant en Grèce. Voilà. So that's all you need to know, except when you consult his site online. And so, I'd like to start perhaps with Dan, and like to ask him, as an economist, how he looks at those issues in the broad frame as well as for Ireland.
Good, thank you, Wesley, and thanks to the Centre for the invitation. It's always good to be in Paris, particularly on a beautiful summer day like today. Wesley, your introduction was so good that you took most of my points. So let me just sort of try and give as big a picture, not economically, but more broadly as well, and say that the breaking apart of Britain from Europe is the stuff of strategic nightmare for Ireland. And I think the only comparison for France would be if Germany decided to leave the euro and break with Europe. So big are the connections between Ireland and Britain that even that comparison is really, I don't think, very good. Just to put it in perspective, I kind of think if we go back to 2000 and the turn of the century, Ireland has three really big connections. One with the United States, one with Britain, and one with Europe. If we look at how all those three have developed since then, it hasn't been good. Let's not talk about the United States for the moment, but the UK had Tony Blair as Prime Minister, who, for all his mistakes with around the Iraq War, at that point was viewed as being almost like Macron now, a very positive, progressive sort of figure, and he was also the most pro-Irish Prime Minister there probably had ever been, and was very, his role in the Northern Ireland peace process was very important. And then from an Irish perspective on Europe, at that point, 2000, Europe was viewed almost without any negativity in Ireland. Nothing had happened up to that point that made Europe seem constraining or negative. I think things have changed a lot. Clearly, what's happened in Britain with Britain's decision to leave, and Europe has also changed a lot. We've had the euro crisis, and there is a perception in smaller member states that Europe is not as favorable to small countries as it used to be, and that the bigger countries are more dominant, and if I may, that the European institutions are not as even-handed as they used to be. And that is a perception, it may be wrong, I think there's some element of truth in it, but there is a perception, and maybe we can discuss it, but there is a perception in many smaller member states that's the case. So really, the overall, from 2000, when all of the stars aligned for Ireland with a perfect relationship with the United States, with Europe, and with Britain, or as close as you get to perfect in international affairs, all of those three strategic partners have changed. And Britain pulling away from Europe really presents this enormous decision. And the decision is, do we remain in Europe and try and form a new relationship with Britain and all the difficulties of that, or join Britain? I think it's very clear, there is a wide consensus that the Republic has to choose Europe over Britain for a whole number of reasons. Economically, politically, geopolitically, the nature of any kind of relationship between Ireland, a small country, and Britain would be so imbalanced, whereas within a European context, it is a rules-based system which, no matter how the system has changed, and it may not be as good for smaller countries, it's still better for smaller countries to be in a rules-based system. And then let me just finish with one single fact, that the asymmetric shock that our paper earlier in the year mentioned, for France, the exports of France to the United Kingdom amount to about 2.5% of GDP in France. Okay, so 2.5%. In Ireland, it's 17%, so it's 6 times greater. So if the island of Britain sank into the North Sea tonight, it would not have that much of an impact on France, but for Ireland, it would cause an immediate depression, because we simply can't compare the depths of the economic connections. So this is really a strategic disaster for Ireland, having to choose and having to make these decisions in a way that I don't think any other member state, certainly Belgium, the Netherlands, have close relations, but it's not as close as between Ireland and the UK. So this is there's no really good way of putting it. It unfortunately, things have gone the wrong way, and that is, as in life, international affairs can take bad turns, and unfortunately, that is the position Ireland is in with regards to Brexit.
Thank you very much. Perhaps we could come back later on and look at the economic side of things in greater detail as it affects not only the Republic but the North as well. Could I go on to Gaetan and again, you know, within the logic of a kind of keeping a broader perspective on things. You're working with the European Commission. Would you like to tell us, about where the negotiations are and where the European Commission thinks they're going, and when they think that might happen?
Well, first I have to apologize for my French. It's not my native language, so I'll be the first one to speak with a non-native language. So sorry about that. About my English, sorry, I said my French, sorry. My French should be better, not sure, but it should be. Just maybe it's important to talk about the timing, because you read all of the time in the papers, and it's obviously it's easier to understand. But we talk about Brexit. Brexit has not taken place, and this is the first thing we should say, because we are at the beginning of a process that started in March with the notification of the will to withdraw from the European Union from the UK, and this, according to the treaty, started a two-year process where UK is still a member, and so the economic impact is not there. The first thing to say. And we should also remember that there will be two kind of negotiations, actually, because UK has said quite clearly that it has offered what has been told a hard Brexit, but we don't really know what is a hard and a soft Brexit in reality. But it has said that it wanted also to leave the single market and the European economic area, which is another way of having the single market, the case of Norway. So that means it will become, normally in 2 years' time, a third country with which we will have to negotiate a free trade agreement. But first, what we need to negotiate is the withdrawing. So it's what we call the Article 50 negotiation. So we are following the negotiation according to the article that says that when a country wants to leave, it has 2 years to negotiate this withdrawal. One thing we need to know about the timing is also that the Commission has said, okay, we're going to negotiate that, but first we need to agree on the basic principles. It's like in a divorce, apparently, before starting the tough negotiation, you need to agree on the basic principles. I don't know, I haven't been through that, but I've been told it's wise. So this basic principle, I just wanted to say that because the Commission has said that there are three very important issues to discuss in this principal time. First are the citizens' rights. So obviously all the people, the EU citizens living in the UK and the UK people living in the European Union, and of course Ireland is very much concerned with that, I presume. The second issue is the finance. And on that point, the Commission has been quite clear. And when I say the Commission, actually, it's more than the Commission. It's the European Union, because as you know, it's not the Commissioner, sorry, but the negotiator, Michel Barnier, has been appointed by the Commission, but also by the whole European Union. He's the EU negotiator. Of course, he will work very closely with the Council of Ministers and the Parliament, but he's the chief negotiator. So I lost my what I was saying now. Yeah, finance. Yeah. So the financing is important because basically the UK has made commitments. As you know, we negotiate what we call the financial perspective in the EU. It's basically the EU budget for 7 years. So it has made commitment until 2020. So this means it cannot leave like that without paying the bill, basically. And this means that we're going to have to agree on the principle to calculate that bill, just to make sure that this is out of the way, because otherwise it will pollute the discussion. And the third point, and that's why I wanted to mention it, concerns Northern Ireland, because the Commission is very aware that it's an issue, that the Good Friday Agreement shouldn't be damaged in any way, and it considers that it's a principal issue, that we should make sure it's not in danger, and also that the common travel area between Ireland and the UK is recognized. So I think it's important to say that, because we considered, we realize in somehow that this specific issue with Ireland, I mean, of course there is the economic issue, but there's also frontier issue, which is quite important. Frontier for peace reason, but also frontier for goods and services, and so I wanted to reassure people here that we are, of course, well aware that Ireland has a specific issue in the Brexit, Southern Ireland, Northern Ireland, and that we will take care of that, and of course, make sure we are independent negotiator and listening to everyone in that process. This is just what I wanted to say first.
Thank you. And perhaps I could move on to Alain and say that there has been a lot of coverage in the French media, the French press, of Brexit, obviously, and you've got publications like Le Monde Diplomatique, and at the other end of the spectrum, things like Le Causeur, who are doing special issues on Brexit. Outre-Terre has just brought out a major collection of essays on Brexit. So there's clearly, interest in that area. As a French journalist and someone, who's worked in Greece for many years, you were the special correspondent there for many years, and you cover, European issues very broadly. What would you say would be, if you like, the angle that would be taken in France specifically on this Irish aspect of Brexit? Are there representations, if you like, that would strike you as being significant?
So, thank you. So I need also to apologize for my English, but my English is less good than hers, so it's a real apologies. So you will see. So for the it's true that for the Brexit coverage in France, we put the focus mainly on Britain. After that, on the Scottish issue, the idea of the referendum, the split of the United Kingdom, and the Irish coverage, I'm afraid, came in the third position, because it was not such a big issue for us. We are worrying about the situation in Northern Ireland since the last elections. It's a crucial issue. But yes, we made many reports about Northern Ireland, about the idea of the hard borders, and the worriness of people there, and with the idea of the end of the Good Friday Agreement. And yes, we made a lot of report about that too.
So, in other words, it's basically, it's interesting to see that, you would think that the French would be looking at Ireland through the prism of the 6 counties, in fact, through the north and what's happening there. It's almost a kind of a hangover from the period of the Troubles and everything that's still very that dominated. There was a major frame for the French media at the time, and that really hasn't changed then. No. Okay. Could I come back to, at the risk of being systematic, appearing to be systematic and moving from here across, backwards and forwards, I hesitate to do this, to come back to Dan and come back to what we were talking about earlier on, and the more economic aspects of the thing. When you read the analyses of, as soon as Brexit was decided, people started producing reports on the impact that was going to have on Ireland. And the dominant line was pessimism. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Right.
Just, that's all that has to be said.
But, and that's the second part of my question, because the horrifying thing you see when you ask a question, somebody gives you a one-word answer. So you have to think of the next stage. And so I said, but despite the fact that all of the economists agree that things are pessimistic, the government talks about opportunities. And when we listen to the Irish government, the word opportunities is always put up there. As an economist, which opportunities would you see?
Okay, well, I suppose economists exist in some way to give a pessimistic balance to politicians who have to be positive.
Upbeat.
They have to talk about opportunities. If a political leader comes out and starts sounding defeatist and starts sounding negative, then people lose faith very quickly. So politicians must be positive. If you take a sheet of paper and you put all of the negative, just economic aspects, there are a lot of them, and they all add up to a big impact. And that's particularly, as I say, for Ireland, that is so connected. It's a very open economy anyway, and a lot of that is towards the United Kingdom. Now, it's not as much as people think. Ireland's trade with the European Union, excluding Britain, is twice as much as its trade with Britain. So even from that economic perspective, Europe is much more important economically than Britain. But if you look at the list, you'll see a lot of things that are negative, and there's one positive thing, and that is that British companies and foreign companies in Britain who sell to Europe face uncertainty. If Britain is outside the single market and outside the customs union, those British and foreign companies will say, can we continue to do business? And will doing business with Europe be much more expensive? And if they calculate that it will, some of them will move some of their capacity into the European Union. Could be to Paris. Financial companies are looking at Paris, Frankfurt, Amsterdam, Dublin, but not only financial companies, other types of services companies, Japanese manufacturers. I was in Australia last week. Their biggest destination for investment in Europe is the United Kingdom because of their historical links. And many Australian companies are looking at what the future will be for them. Will they move? And naturally, Ireland will say to a company, an Australian company, an American company that is based in the United Kingdom, or even British companies, if you want to be certain about access to the European market, come to us. And that's already happening. But as I say, there are maybe 10 negatives, and that's the one positive. And it certainly is a positive, and it is an opportunity. And it's one that many countries, France, are looking at. At this conference in Australia, it was an EU-Australia conference. And all of the European countries were saying to the Australians, come to us, come to Guy from Lisbon, the Germans, everyone is saying, looking at the opportunity. And clearly, in a disastrous situation, you have to mitigate as much as you can. But the net effect is clearly very, very negative.
Yes. No, I'm just to sort of react to, I can remember reading, it must have been a couple of months ago, that that Ireland was very interested in getting some of the stuff from the city of London, but that people seem to think that that if they were moving at all, they would be moving to bigger financial centres like Frankfurt or Paris, possibly, rather than, despite the English language thing, of course, that Ireland has very much in its favour.
Yeah, look, I think there's a lot. The city is clearly Europe's biggest financial centre, and there's no doubt that a considerable number of companies will move at least part of their capacity out of London into the European Union. And there's no doubt that different companies will look at different places. Some will come to Paris, some will go to Frankfurt, some will go to Amsterdam, and some will come to Dublin. And all of those places will compete. Luxembourg, of course, will compete very aggressively. And it's impossible to know how much investment will leave, because we don't know how hard the Brexit will be. We don't know where they're going to go. But I think everyone, and certainly we in Ireland, are very much looking at that opportunity. But as I say, it's an opportunity to mitigate the other multiple negative effects, rather than saying, yes, bonanza, wonderful time. And just another point that one of the big negatives for Brexit will affect the agricultural sector.
Yes, I was going to ask you about that.
where the investment out of the UK will go is mostly into Dublin. So you'll get an increase in the division between urban and rural. Urban may gain, yes, but rural will definitely lose. And as we all know, in a modern economy everywhere, it's the cities that incomes are higher, that are generating growth. In many cases, rural areas are in decline, with population decline, opportunity decline, and anything that accelerates that process makes the social change, the management of social change, more difficult.
Thank you very much. Gaetan, you were talking at a few minutes ago, and you were saying that you were talking about 2 stages. And you were talking about the preparatory phase that we're in at the minute, and working out the rules for that, and coming to some kind of protocol on these 3 key issues. And that's going to lead us in then to the nitty-gritty, really into the actual debate on who gets what, etc. If Europe or the European Commission had its wish and could send a letter to Santa Claus, what would it write in the letter? What would the European Commission ask for as a final arrangement with the UK?
Well, I think first that if we could write to Santa Claus, we would hope we could go back in the past and not have a no in the referendum. I think obviously.
Okay.
Yeah.
After the arrangement.
No, I just wanted first, if you allow me to give some optimism. I'm not a politician, but still I have a slightly different view. I'm not sure I would put as much in the negative balance as you do. Well, first, it means that all the people in European institutions will have an Irish accent speaking English, which is,
Unless, no, I won't say what I
and second, I think you need also to think of the European Union project as a political project as well. And I think we are in a phase where we see, and we have seen it very specifically with the Trump election, that there's something happening also in the building of also a political union. And that it has a reason. The reason is that we are stronger together in globalization, and I think that will still hold, and that Ireland will be part of that. My analysis is that is the winning side, and Ireland is on the winning side. I don't agree with the analysis, the UK analysis, that they will be better alone. So then I have to translate that into, well, you're right to stay with us. And I think there are very good reasons for that, political and economic as well, because we are stronger. We of course, there might still be some kind of competition within the EU, maybe financial places, perhaps, but there's a lot of convergence going on as well, economic convergence, social convergence, tax convergence in the future, which means that for an external investor, it will be an attractive place. And Ireland, I'm sure, will be an attractive place because it's an English-speaking country. It's close to the UK market. I mean, I would not put as much on the negative side as you have. And so what
Come back to Santa.
Well, I think first that we would want a deal, and we would want a fair deal for both sides. Yes. That's for sure. And also, we want to keep a close relationship, including on security issues, for example. That's I think important to say. At the same time, I have the impression that the 27 member states are quite united in having quite, strong demands and wanting that whichever free trade agreement we will have in the future, that we keep a level playing field, that there will be no kind of dumping, whatever it will be, social, environmental, or tax dumping, that we will manage to find an agreement where it's not becoming a place where the UK is very different from the rest, and that's the way it does the deal. That will not work, I think. I think that the 27 are very united on that. They are very united also on the issue that you can't do cherry picking. So single markets, the four freedom, you don't want the fours, you don't have the single markets. So I think level playing field and no cherry picking would be what we would ask to Santa Claus.
Yeah, well, that's that's fine. I'm sure he'll give you that.
You think?
Yes, you're talking about the unity of the 27, and of course that's something that comes out very, very strongly in the draft document that they published at the end of March. They were really emphasizing this notion of a united front, the 27 together. And at the same time, when you read the text, Ireland is the only, apart from Cyprus and Gibraltar get a mention, but Ireland is the only place. Scotland isn't mentioned, for example, interestingly, by the European Commission. It's only Ireland is mentioned twice. And then, as you're saying, one of these three preoccupations is Ireland. So, there's the 27 who are united, certes, but would there be among those 27, would there be any readiness on the part to give a greater voice to Ireland? Dan was saying earlier on that Europe seemed to be moving towards, the bigger, weightier countries, and there's an opportunity for this particular voice to be heard. Would that be in any way conceivable?
I'm not sure I understand completely the question, but what I said earlier, I think, is that there is a recognition that there are specific issues. One of them concerns Ireland. So that means you don't have more weight in the negotiation because the 27 are together, as I said, there's one block, but you are listened to because you have a specific issue. That's obvious. And I think Michel Barnier, the chief negotiator, said that he is willing to listen to everyone and specifically to those that have specific issues. And I think personally he is very much aware of the issue, because he actually, when he was commissioner for regional policy, he was involved in the financing in the region and the agreement at the time. So you know, it's not abstract for him.
Yes.
I think he really understands.
Okay, thank you very much indeed. Yes,
Yes.
Alain.
If I can add something, it's. I think 1 year ago, it was impossible to imagine that in front of the Brexit issue, you would have Europe united. It was something completely unconceivable. So at this time, because so, you know, Europe, the Brexit seems to be the last crisis which will kill the EU. So there was this strong feeling, I think, in every country of the EU. It came after the Greek crisis, the migrant crisis, the Russian crisis. It was impossible to speak about Europe without adding this word crisis. And now we are 1 year later, and the EU made the things quite right, united, and I think it's not just the case in the UK, because they were strong 1 year ago with this strong vote, this idea to take control back of their country. And now they are more divided than 1 year before. So, and this is we have seen that with this election. So it's a way to be more optimistic.
Thank you very much. Absolutely, please do.
Can I just agree entirely with that point that you made about countries being listened to? I think that one of the great aspects about the European political structure is that you have a seat at the table even if you're a small country, and that if you articulate a view that's important to you, you will be listened to. So many people a year ago were saying, people in Ireland who have become maybe more skeptical about Europe, were saying, oh, we're a small country, we'll be forgotten about. Yet, if we look at Barnier's documents and the negotiating positions that we're starting with, Ireland gets mentioned, you know, a lot. And that's not only a diplomatic achievement by the Irish government, but it's also a reflection of the political structures in Europe, that it allows you to magnify your influence. And that maybe brings me to a point where I would disagree with you slightly. You said to being on the winning side. I think European integration has been a win-win. I think European disintegration is a lose-lose. Britain leaving the European Union is bad for everyone. I think everyone loses. And I don't think there's really a winning side on this. Disintegration in Europe will be as bad for Europe as European integration is good for Europe. So I think it's important that we don't think about this in win-lose terms, that it is a tragedy for Europe that one of its most important countries, historically, along with France, Britain and France are the two most consistently important countries in Europe, that one of them has decided to go back to the past and break with the kind of political structure that we've created that moves beyond confrontational balance of power politics into the new kind of politics that have been created in Europe.
Thank you. And perhaps
I have to react because obviously I can't be as nuanced as I would like to be in English, but what I wanted to say is not the winning over the UK, is winning in globalization. That's what I meant. I mean the project, the European project, is a project that should help the EU to be stronger. It's towards the global world. I was saying that, not the UK. We are not in a competition or fight with the UK with one who loses, one who, you're right. We're all losing in that, and that's why I said if I was Santa Claus, I would go back in the past. The fact is that mathematically we are stronger with the numbers compared to the UK, but politically, of course, everyone loses.
please.
I disagree, in fact, because Yes, I agree. Brexit was a catastrophe. It was a disintegration of Europe and so on. But 1 year later, is it really the case? Yes, the UK is splitting, but I think that I have the feeling that there is a good reaction of the EU, and they feel that they now we maybe can build a stronger Europe without the Britain, because most of the 19 countries are from the Eurozone, and now there is a real will to build a better Eurozone with these 19 countries. It's difficult. It will take time, but there is this will in every country of the Eurozone, and this is the real power of the EU now, the Eurozone, and we can see that countries which are not in the Eurozone could be weakened because of that, and specifically countries as Poland, of Hungary, which were strong allies of Britain, and which are and we have very difficult relationship with this country because of the value, because this kind of illiberal democracy that they want to impose in their country. I think, and during the migrant crisis, we have difficult relationship with those countries, and I think with the Brexit, they are weakened, and it's good news.
Can I perhaps open the debate up to the floor and ask if there's anyone who would like to ask a question or to make a comment? Down at the back.
Yeah, just first, thanks of all to the panel for this very interesting discussion. I'm just wondering, do the panel feel that as a result of Brexit that the EU needs to reform itself in any way? And if so, what major reforms would you be looking at or suggesting?
Who would like to take that? Would you like to say something?
Well, one thing that was obvious in the vote and worrying is when you look at the reasons that pushed this, that led to this vote, and what you saw in the public opinion. There you saw some aspect that you could find also in the Trump election, and that you can find in a lot of countries outside the UK, in the European Union, including in France. I mean, we should not forget that the election was quite specific, I would say, to be very diplomatic, and that you have an opinion, some Euroscepticism growing, people wondering whether this European project is for them, or is for the rich, or is for the people who are mobile, or is for the people who speak 5 languages and can live in another country, and is it for me? I think that's the message that was sent by these votes, and you can find that in every country in the European Union. So I think it's perhaps one of the positive, if there are any consequence of the Brexit, is that it was a shock. Finally, for some people, realized that we couldn't carry on as we used to. I mean, many people had analyzed that for years, but some people needed that kind of shock to realize that we should change something. And my impression is that the Juncker Commission had come up at the very beginning with some ideas of making Europe more social and this kind of issue, but it accelerated it, I think. And if you look at the process that is going on now with this white paper that the Commission has published with 5 scenarios for the future of Europe, after that you had a white paper on social Europe, you had a white paper on globalization, and you can sense that we are going faster towards a Europe that is maybe more protective, Europe that protects, that people have realized more than there are people who feel they are losers in globalization, that Europe should also be for them and not just for the winners of globalization. I think that's where the EU, I think, will go in the next years, taking more that into account, I think. And then, obviously, the reform that is going on, I think, is accelerated also what Alain was talking about with the deepening of the Eurozone, defense. There's a lot going on now in that direction. This was already there, but it accelerated, and now it's much more visible. And I also agree that we can feel there is more unity in the EU. I don't know if that answers your question.
Dan wants to come in as well. Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Yes, I agree with Gaetan. Yes, I think people in Europe understand that Europe's need to change, and I agree. Juncker tried to do important step, but it was, as I mentioned before, a very difficult time with all this crisis happening. So it was difficult to reform Europe at this moment. So, but they wrote a lot of reports which are quite interesting, and I think that the 10 years tenure of the EU as a European Commission by José Manuel Barroso were a complete disaster, because it was at this time that we could have done something, and it was quite impossible, and because it was a very liberal agenda and difficult to reform at this point.
Could I just answer that, or just give a thought on that question and come back to Alain's previous point about a stronger Europe? It seems to me that the most flawed part of the European project has been the euro. The euro has, whereas the EU has helped solve problems, the euro in many ways has created problems that would otherwise not have existed, and Greece is probably the classic example. So I think it seems to me that the euro is the big thing that needs to change structurally. But I would also say that the euro was the one big project that Britain didn't join, and that if Britain had joined, I think it would have been a more balanced project. And one of my concerns about Britain leaving, and this is not to be anti-German, Germany plays a very positive role in the European Union, but France has not been balancing Germany within the European Union. I think the European Union needs a stronger France. It needed a stronger Britain. That more European integration could end up looking like the euro without Britain and without a strong France. And I have to say that does cause me some concern.
Thank you. There was a question over here. Yes.
Yeah, given the political chaos in the UK at the moment, and the fact that the government has no plan of how to square the circle, do you think that Brexit is actually going to take place in 15 months? This is for a journalist.
No, I think it is for Santa Claus to answer this question. So it's very difficult to answer. Actually, we don't know. Emmanuel Macron, but also Wolfgang Schäuble said a couple of days ago that the door is open in case of no Brexit, but I don't know. I'm not sure. I think now they feel that in the European countries that Brexit means Brexit too. So, and we are waiting.
There was a
But
question.
we'll know.
There was a question at the back, Rosetta.
No, we've kind of gone past the subject, but it was about lobbies, the power of lobbies, and whether in the reforms of Europe, control of lobbies, because one does, in the press, be it environmental, social issues, the power of lobbies to influence European decisions comes up a lot in newspaper articles anyway.
Any reaction to that? Or?
Lobbyists, yeah, I know that it has a negative tone in that term, but lobbyists are also part of democracy, and they are present everywhere, including here. My feeling is here. I was trying to point the National Assembly and the government, but I don't know the direction. My feeling, I mean, this is from what I see from the practice of European issues, is that what is important if you have lobbies is to have a transparency system. That means everyone should know who meets who when, to be able to see whether it has had an impact, because you are free to meet someone. What you shouldn't do is do what he asks you to do because he's got power and money. So my impression is that at the European level you have a system that is actually quite transparent, and even more than in some national member states. More than in France, honestly, more than in France. There is no possibility for a commissioner to meet anyone and that is not known, that is not published. It is in the internal regulation of the European Commission. If you cannot meet a commissioner if you are not registered in the transparency register, so you need as a lobby to register in that in that register. I know you need to be listed in there with who you are and who you represent, and the commissioner cannot meet someone who is not in that register. I don't think it exists in France, and Pierre Moscovici often says, because he's the French commissioner and he's lived both systems, and he feels that it's much more transparent at the European level. That he often says, at the Commission, you don't have les visiteurs du soir that you have in the Élysée or in ministries. And I believe him. I tend to believe him.
Could I just add to that? I think we often don't acknowledge the good things. We focus too much on the negatives, and maybe I do that as well as an analyst. But if you compare Brussels with Washington, the system in Brussels is much better insulated from money and lobbies than in DC. American politics is hugely influenced by money and lobby groups in an untransparent way. The European system in Brussels, for a number of reasons, is much better insulated and more transparent, as has been said.
Yes, it's true, but it's also true that there are some problems and concerns, and we have seen that with all this former commissioner working for car industry or for a bank, and I think the problem, yes, there is a real transparency. And the lobbyist activity is more controlled in Brussels than in France and also in the US. But maybe the problem is all these revolving doors between commission, lobbyists, and this kind of incestuous relationship in Brussels. So it's not. We have that in France too. Yes, that's true. But I think it's also true in Brussels. So, and even with precise rules, there is this kind of occult influence of lobbyists in Brussels. Yes.
I had one question over here.
Yeah, I was wondering about the special status that Northern Ireland is asking about, because Sinn Féin is about to gain majority. That would be. I'm sorry, I'm French.
No, no, no. Yes. Um,
So I was wondering how and if the EU is ready to support that kind of thing for Northern Ireland, or if it will happen only if they get reunification in the south.
so, a question on the position of Sinn Féin, basically, asking for special status for Northern Ireland, and the attitude of Europe towards that issue, that of a possible rather than an eventual reunification. Would anybody like to react?
Yeah, I suppose it's very difficult to see. There's no immediate model for that. How it would work within the European system, and particularly around the trade dimension to it. So let's say if Northern Ireland is a special case, and Britain decides to have a free trade agreement with Argentina for cheap Argentinian meat, that goes into Britain. How do you stop it going in from Northern Ireland, and from Northern Ireland into the Republic, and from the Republic to France? So there's very complicated things around trade. And then also from the British side, it's very difficult with the Scottish dimension to see Britain ceding that kind of thing. And then internally within the UK, and you know this better than anyone, it's difficult to see the unionist community accepting a differentiation from the rest of the United Kingdom on the basis that that could loosen the relationship within the United Kingdom.
Yes, there's a whole debate on, where the border might be placed, if there's going to be any controls. Where is that going to happen? Is that going to happen on the present border, as it exists at the minute? Or would that be, as it were, displaced, and would controls take place, at ports and airports on the island of Ireland? And of course, that would be resisted, as you quite rightly say, by the unionist community. And what is, it's important perhaps to remember as well, is that it's the unionist community that was at the back of the Leave vote in the referendum. That those who voted Leave were overwhelmingly indeed from the unionist community. But what's interesting, if I could just, before I take the next question, what's interesting about that is that, with all this talk about borders and Brexit being linked into borders, I think that, when the unionist community was voting the way it did, it wasn't thinking about the Irish border. And I think that's important to say, that the unionists are happy with the border as it is. And they've come to accept that, and they have come to indeed recognize the interest, the mutual interest that exists between the North and the South. The borders that they were thinking about were the external borders of the UK. Now that's another story, but I think it's, and you can think about that whatever you like ideologically. But in terms of the border inside Ireland, it's important to say that unionism, I would see as having reconciled itself to a certain extent with the border. And I'm sorry for manipulating my position as a moderator, and I now apologize, and someone at the back, yes, over there.
Yes, hi, I had a question about the distribution of the negative impacts of Brexit, particularly in Ireland. You started talking about the agricultural industry as one area, but are governments in the whole European Union starting to think about what communities or industries will be significantly impacted by Brexit, and whether those governments are going to have to create some specific responses?
Yes, I think there's,
That just gives me an opportunity that I maybe should have clarified earlier, and I think Kaitan picked me up on this, that when I said there was a lot of negatives and one positive, I wasn't speaking about Europe in general, I was just speaking about Ireland because of the very close relationship. So I think it's absolutely terrible for Ireland, but to come to your question, most European countries are like France. They actually don't export and trade that much with the UK. And the further east you go, the less important it is. So I had a discussion in Brussels recently with a guy from Croatia, and Brexit doesn't really matter to them. You know, it's so far down their list. He said, yeah, there are some British people with holiday homes, and that's an issue. But really, for the Croats, you know, Brexit is really not that important. So I think for most countries, the economic impact on communities will be relatively small because the trade relationship is not fundamental to their economic activity.
I'm not sure Croatia is the best example. There's 1 million Poles in Britain.
I'm just simply saying from the economic relationship perspective, rather than the movement of people, which of course is extremely important, and those governments are prioritizing the people aspect of it in the early part of the negotiations is one of those first three things that needs to get solved.
Even in trade, like lots of British firms in Poland.
But that a British firm in Poland, I think this is an important point, that a British firm in Poland there shouldn't be a problem. A British firm will have Polish workers in Poland and will continue to work in the European market. If anything, you might get more British companies going to Poland to jump over the new barriers to trade. But I can see no reason why anyone will want to stop a Polish company investing in Britain or a British company investing in Poland to do business. I don't think anyone is proposing that we stop doing that.
There's a gentleman here in the front, in the second row.
In the original vote for Brexit, Scotland voted very much in favour to stay in the European Common Market. Based on the recent elections in UK, do you think there's a possibility of a referendum in Scotland to stay, to go back into the European Common Market? And would Ireland be closely watching the result, if possible, to follow Scotland in if they're successful in the vote?
It's difficult to say because, yes, Scotland voted against Brexit strongly, but when you saw the result of the last election, the party which represents, which fight for the independence of Scotland, lost a lot of seats. And the Tories increased. So I don't think that right now the SNP is ready to make a referendum. But it could change. Yes, when the Brexit will take place, and with the result, what will be the economic situation in Scotland and even in Ireland. But right now, nobody wants to think about that. There is so much trouble. Yeah.
Just a quick question. What credibility or what leverage does Theresa May have now that she's going to work with Foster to come to the table negotiating next week? Can we really say that she's going to be representing, what is she going to be representing, in fact? I just see her as being so fragile now.
It is indeed, a major issue. I think that
whatever she puts out, is it going to be there like in 6 months or in a year and a half, or how quickly are we going to be able to negotiate something and for it to be firm and just to continue talking on those issues instead of just bringing them back and bringing them back?
Do you want to answer?
I've been told I have to leave. So
right.
Could I thank you, my fellow panelists, and everyone. It's been a really interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. we'll have time maybe for a couple of more questions, and then we'll stop. But Dan had to go a wee bit earlier. Sorry, just to sort of finish on that, and it's just to say that the alliance with the DUP would not involve, for example, a DUP minister in cabinet in Downing Street. It is being negotiated, as far as I can understand, as being a question of support in return for, and that I think is what's going on at the minute, that Foster and the DUP are trying to get more money, basically, for Northern Ireland. That's basically what they're doing. They're trying to use the leverage that has been offered to them absolutely miraculously, and nobody would have believed this. I mean, the thing is that Arlene Foster herself, had a weak showing in earlier elections, and everybody was looking for her blood, and now everybody is saying, "Wow, she is going to bring home the bacon." Absolutely. So the situation is changing so rapidly that it's impossible really to, you couldn't make it up, as we say in Ireland. You couldn't make it up. But I think what's important to remember is that, it really is a question of a very strategic, pragmatic alliance. Now, you can think about it, whatever you like, but that, I think, is what is up for grabs. Of course, everybody is going on, on about the LGBT rights, about gay marriage and everything like that. I don't know where that's going to go. What interests the DUP is money, and it's money for Northern Ireland and for the whole of Northern Ireland, and that's what's going to make it very difficult in negotiations with Sinn Féin, because if she can bring home money, then Sinn Féin's going to have to say, okay, what do we do with it or not? There's a whole issue as well with, whether Sinn Féin finally takes its seats in Westminster or not. That's another debate. But anyway, that would be my reaction to it. Sorry, yes.
They don't want to take their seat in Westminster, and so. But there is also a strong worriness inside the Tory party about the Irish issue, and recently, John Major made a strong statement against an alliance with DUP. We have seen that the Times, the conservative newspaper, write an editorial called Belfast Blues, and say basically if the price to have a minority government to avoid Corbyn, if the price it's the peace in Ireland, it's not worth it. I think the British government is thinking about what they can do exactly with the DUP, and it's why we have no solution right now.
One person.
What are the key elements of a good outcome for Ireland and for Northern Ireland? Like, what are the top 2 or 3 things that would be a good outcome for us?
What would be the Santa Claus wish, basically? Again, yes.
Specifically related to Ireland and Northern Ireland.
I think that the very top of the list is the fluidity across the border. I think that's the main thing that everyone wants. The other preoccupation, yes.
So just on that, but just to square the circle, how are we going to do that concretely, given that we are an island and we've got the border with the rest?
Yep.
How I can't get my head around it.
Neither can I. No, neither can I. There has got to be some kind of filter. Ian Paisley wrote an article about, 4 months ago, and he was talking about the electronic border. And apparently there's an electronic border which is inspired by the border that is around Switzerland and that's being used as we speak. And he was talking he was saying that is actually being put in place in between Northern Ireland and the South. And Paisley's line was that would minimise disruption in movement of people and goods across the border. Whether you believe that or not is another question. The real issue behind that is the memory of the Troubles and the militarized border. Everybody talks about the hard border, but it really was a memory, if you like, of the militarized border. So the border, I think, is really one of the priorities, and I really don't know unless, I mean, the alternative, as we were saying earlier on, was to shift the border, the controls over to the East Coast, basically, which, as we said earlier, wouldn't please everyone. The other thing that people are very worried about, clearly, is European funding and the continuance of European funding. I have the figures here, somewhere in my notes. It's a considerable amount of money. There's money going into along the border, therefore affecting, I don't know how many of the counties, north and south of the border. In fact, all of the counties in Northern Ireland, as far as I can gather, except Antrim, and the borders around the South Donegal, Cavan, Monaghan, around there. But the money is also targeted to the inner cities. And to helping relieve real, social problems, in Belfast and in Derry and in other towns. So the money side of things is very important. The other thing that everybody's worried about is agriculture, because again, and that's linked into the subsidies, that's linked into CAP, to the Common Agricultural Policy, and the farmers in the north are particularly worried about that. So those are the areas really that people are preoccupied with. Voilà.
Yeah, the answer maybe is a need to have a very soft Brexit to avoid this problem, or no Brexit. But I don't know exactly what could be a soft Brexit, and without freedom of circulation of people. And so if this is a result of the Brexit, I don't think it was needed to ask questions to people to have that, but we'll see. So I listening, it was a British journalist recently on French TV talking about Brexit, and one says that in the last election of last week, nobody mentioned the issue of migration during the campaign. It was mentioned, but it was not at all the main issue. So maybe it means that things can evolve a little bit.
I think one more question.
Maybe Britain could close its door to European workers and European students. Is it an opportunity for Ireland to attract new skills?
What would your position be on that? What would you say to that?
Well, yes, because I think that's what I was saying before. There are drawbacks, but there are many opportunities, and it's one of them. I mean, we have in the education system, the working environment now, many opportunities for mobility. I think the UK will keep some of this. Will want to keep some of this, but not with all that goes with it. That means, for example, the fees will probably go up, and you can already see some students thinking, well, I'd rather, if I want to go to an English-speaking country, I'd rather go to a country I know where the fees will be lower. Yes, that's certainly something, a great opportunity. I just want to say that about what was bit said before, but the issue of trade and peace, and what I read in our line is finding imaginative solutions. So I think it's so interesting you were talking about electronic. I mean, but I'm confident. You know why? Because I think peace and trade is what the EU can do best. It's true. This is what we've been doing. This is what we are the best at, and I'm confident that we are good at thinking about solution rather than problems on these issues.
Well, listen, I'm delighted that we have got to the word imagination. We're delighted that we've got to the word imagination at the end of this debate, and to end on such a positive note, I'd like to thank both of our speakers and Dan as well, who had to leave, for a really interesting debate. Thank you very much indeed.